Hi, welcome back. In this video, we will see how to create a cloud function which gets triggered by an HTTP request. While doing this, we will explore the Google Cloud Console UI for creating the cloud functions and explore different configuration options available. We will cover all these concepts one by one as we progress in the course. So let's first understand the demo setup. It will be a simple function that will get triggered by an HTTP request and return a hello world response. The request can either be GET or POST. If the request is GET, we will extract the name from query parameter, and for POST requests, we will extract the name from the JSON body. If neither of those parameters are present, the default name will be read from environment variable. Then the function will return a simple hello name response. So let's get started. Head over to the Google Cloud Console and select Cloud Functions from the left menu. You will find Cloud Functions in the Compute section. If you are using this for the first time, you might get a prompt to enable the API. If that is the case, enable it. Then hit on Create Function and it should open the function creation wizard. Let us discuss the configuration options one by one. So first, we will need to name our function. Let's call it my first cloud function. Then we will have to choose the region in which we wish to deploy our function. You can deploy it to any available regions, but choose the region closest from your trigger region. This will ensure the least latency in the execution request. We will leave it as US Central 1. Next, we will configure the trigger options. We have a lot of options when it comes to trigger type. We have HTTP, PubSub, cloud storage, and many more. These three are the oldest triggers supported and have been here for a long time. The rest, as you can see, are in beta and are recently added. We will discuss all the trigger types at length in the upcoming videos. For this demo's purpose, we will choose HTTP as trigger type, which means that we will be triggering our function execution via sending an HTTP request to following URL. Next up is Authentication Setup. By default, each invocation of the function needs to be authenticated, but for this demo's purpose, we will allow unauthenticated requests so that we can send the request from Postman. Next, you can choose to require HTTPS while making the request. We will keep it unchecked for this demo. Hit on Save. Now let us configure the runtime, build and connection settings. You can configure the amount of RAM that your function needs. You can choose from 128 megabytes and can go all the way up to 8 gigabytes depending on the requirement. Then configure the timeout for the function. Your function cannot run indefinitely, and if it does because of some bug or some other condition, Google will auto-terminate the execution after the timeout. By default, it is 60 seconds, which is too much for an HTTP request, and we will leave it as such. You can configure anything between 1 second to 9 minutes for the timeout. Next, you choose the service account which should be used to run the function. In general, you should have per function service account for granular permissions, but for this demo, we will choose the default App Engine service account. Then we can configure the auto scaling. By default, when this field is 0 or empty, it means infinite scaling. Google will keep scaling your function as needed, but if you wish to cap the maximum number of instances to safeguard against any malicious execution and a mounting GCP bill, you can specify the number. Up next is the environment variables. If you wish to set some variables which will be available during the execution, you can set them here. By default, there are some environment variables which are available at the runtime pertaining to the execution environment. Things like project ID, function name, function region, function identity, etc. So we will create a variable named default_name and set its value to world. This environment variable will be used if no parameter is passed in the request. Do note, however, that you should not pass any sensitive value via the environment variables. you should be using a secure solution like KMS to pass in passwords and API credentials. Then we leave the build variables as it is and move to connection settings. Here, you can configure the ingress and egress options for your function. You can configure what incoming traffic is allowed, or more specifically, from which places incoming traffic is allowed. So there are 3 options. You can allow all the traffic, you can allow only internal traffic, or you can allow internal traffic plus the traffic from any load balancer. For the purpose of this demo, we will allow all the traffic. Do note, however, that this is not a safe option for production. So in production setting, choose wisely. Then we will leave the egress as it is, as we have a full video dedicated to egress settings later in the course. Once done, hit next. Now we will have to configure the actual code for the function, the code which will get called when the function is executed. You can choose the runtime, and there is myriad of runtime options available. Few of them are recent additions like .NET Core and PHP 7, hence they are in beta. Other supported languages are Java, Node, Python, Golang and Ruby. And not just this, there are different versions available for each supported language. We will choose Python 3.7 and you can see that there are 2 files already created for you, main.py and requirements.txt. The py file houses the code which will get executed and we will come to it in a moment. The requirements.txt file is the way by which you can add additional packages that your function might depend on. You can add the packages in the file and before execution, the runtime will pip install all the packages. However, do note that you should not install a lot of packages for your functions, because the more the number of packages to be installed, the more time it will take for your function to start up. A good way of keeping the packages to minimum is following the single responsibility principle while developing your functions. If your function has only single responsibility, chances are that you would not need a lot of packages in dependencies. For this demo, we do not need any additional packages, hence we will leave it empty. Now let us see the code. We are going to write the code on similar lines with slight changes. So we will delete this code and write our own. You can choose to write the code inline here in the console, or you can write it in your favorite editor and then copy it here, which is what we are going to do. So let's head over to VS Code and write our function. So now we are in the VS Code and you can see that I am cheating a little bit. I have my code already written, but we will discuss what each and every line in this code means. So here we are importing the OS package, which we will be using to read the environment variable later in this function. So we are only defining a single function that is going to respond to the HTTP request. And for lack of imagination, we have named it respond. This function will take in a request parameter. And since this is a Python function, the type of the request object will be a flask.request. So that will make it easy for us to work with it. If it's a post request, we will have the body as a JSON as we discussed in the demo setup. And then we will do a series of checks based on which we will generate our return message or response message. The thing which we are checking here is that if there are any query parameters, Flask will automatically populate all those query parameters in this map. So we are just checking whether we had any query parameters here. And if we have some query parameters, we'll check if there was a name parameter in there. And if we do find it, we will set the name variable to the value passed in the query parameter. If not, we will check if there was a request body, if this was a post request, and if this was a request body, we will see if there is a name key present in this request JSON. If it is present, we will set the name to the name key value coming from the request body. If the name is neither present in query parameters or in JSON body, I will read in the default underscore name. And once I have this name variable, I will return hello name as the response. So now copy this entire code and let's move to the Google Cloud console. Here we'll paste our code that we have copied. Then we will configure the entry point function. Since we have renamed the original function to respond, we will use that as the entry point. Hit deploy and we should be good to go. The function is being deployed, so I'll come back when it is completely deployed and is in successful state. It might take a minute or two for this function to be successfully deployed. So now the function is in successful state and you can see it is active. Here you can see all the parameters. So it has trigger of HTTP. It is deployed in US Central 1. The runtime is Python 3.7. The memory allocated is 128 MB. The executed function is respond. It was deployed at this time and date, and it allows unauthenticated requests. You can test the function from here itself. So this is the triggering event. I am not passing in anything. I will say test the function and you will see hello world because it has picked up the default name from the environment variable. So now I am going to pass the name parameter in the JSON body. So I'll type in my JSON here. So I will say name and the name is Sushil. Let it verify. Yep, the JSON is valid. So I'll say test my function and here you will see hello Sushil. Now to test the query parameter, I don't see anything here to check that. What I can do is that I can go to the function details and click on the function name. It will give me the URL. I'll go to the details tab. It will give me the trigger URL. Right, I'll copy that. And what I'm going to do is that now I'm going to head over to my Postman. Right. So here is the Postman window. I'll say a new request. It will be a get request and I'll be passing in parameters. So here you can pass in the query parameters. So I will say that as name and the name would be, let's say query name instead of passing in an actual name, and let me send in the request. And yep, you will see that it is returning the correct message. And if I do not send in anything, I can send it and I will see hello world. If I change this request to post and the body will be in the JSON format, and again, I can send in the JSON body and I would say JSON name. And if I do send, I will get hello JSON name. So that is it. That is how we deployed our first cloud function, which responds to HTTP requests, reads in certain parameters, and if no parameters are present, it reads the default parameters from the environment and returns the response string. So if you like this video, please press thumbs up and please consider subscribing the channel if you like the content, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye bye.